All right, you're about to learn today about robust live video transport workflows with AWS Elemental MediaConnect. This is a new service we launched here at reInvent just yesterday. My name's Alex Dunlap. I'm the general manager for AWS Elemental. I'm going to be presenting today with David, who's the senior product manager responsible for our MediaConnect service. We also have a great opportunity to hear from Arkiva, who we've been working with prior to release on the MediaConnect product, and they'll tell you a little bit about their vision and how they're using MediaConnect. So here's the agenda. Here's what we'd like to cover. Want to go through live video transport, kind of set the stage, set the background, the motivation for building the service, what we see in the industry, and the challenges that we saw customers. Then go into the MediaConnect product, talk about what it is, what are its key capabilities, what customer use cases we cover, and give you a little bit of a peek under the hood into some of the things that we've built and really how it works inside. We're going to do a little bit of a demo, so you'll get to see how to operate MediaConnect. And then we'll turn things over to the Arkiva team, and they'll take you through some slides about what they've been working on. We'll come back at the end with some pricing information and kind of how you get started and where you can go to learn more. So let's start with the set the stage. Live video transport. What do we see the opportunity, the challenges? And I guess the first thing that we see is that live video remains a critical component of broadcast programming, particularly for things like sports and news. There is live content will monetize very well. Customers are very interested in watching it. It's a very important part of an overall broadcast experience. It's also something where operators need robust, secure live video transport. So because this is your highest value content, it's the key sporting match or the latest breaking news or a 24/7 channel, operators need to understand that that's going to be moved from place to place reliably and securely. This is part of a general trend to what we see here at AWS of moving broadcast workflows to the cloud. But that cloud is also letting customers be more nimble in their business models. So with the cloud, you can move into broader geographical audiences with your live content. It's no longer a model where if you have a sporting event in a particular market, you're limited to distribution in that market. The cloud lets you distribute that video stream, that live video stream, all over the world. If you can do it reliably, if you can do it securely, if you can do it in a cost-effective manner. So there were two ways that operators typically manage these challenges, or manage this problem. And they both had challenges. So the traditional way was to go to an infrastructure provider. You would go to someone who provided a managed network, maybe it's a fiber network, maybe it's a satellite network, and you'd provision some fixed amount of capacity. This was secure and reliable, but it was slow to set up. They had fixed geographic coverage and limited capacity. So if you wanted to spin up a video stream for a new business that you maybe want to try and experiment with, it wasn't a great fit. The practical ability to be nimble, try new things, scale up, scale down, all of the things we tend to talk about here in AWS just was hard to achieve with a traditional fiber network or a traditional satellite connection. So some customers went to self-managed IP solutions. And these had the characteristics of nimbleness that we're talking about here today. But the customer needed to deploy, configure, and maintain what could be fairly complex systems. They were required to work with frequently multiple vendors to create a complete end-to-end solution to move video from point to point. And they needed to build or add features like security and sharing. That was the customer's responsibility. So it was hard. It was hard to do effectively. So we asked ourselves, could we combine the security and reliability of a satellite or a managed fiber network with the nimbleness that you get from IP transport and combine it into a single product? And that was the motivation for Elemental MediaConnect. So what is MediaConnect? MediaConnect is a reliable, secure, and flexible transport service for live video that enables customers to build transformation and global distribution workflows quickly and effectively. Let's talk a little bit more about what that means. We see really two workflows that customers will address with this solution. The first is contribution workflows. These are workflows where customers need to reliably ingest live video data into the AWS network for video processing or downstream processing. So for example, you might have a production truck at an event site, or you might have a studio facility where you need to get video in, remote affiliates, get video into AWS. AWS Elemental MediaConnect is a tool that allows you to do that securely, reliably, and cost-effectively. The second thing is distribution workflows. So these are workflows where customers need to distribute a live video stream both inside and outside the AWS network. So inside could be multiple distribution points within your AWS account. So we have customers who are looking at using this to send different paths for reliability or redundancy, different processing chains. Or it could be to another region. So I want to take a video feed that I'm sourcing in the EU and send it to the US for downstream processing and distribution. Or it could be to another customer's account. So you could send video from your AWS account to others. Or it could be just destinations outside the AWS network. So we anticipate that customers will use AWS Elemental MediaConnect for both contribution and distribution workflows. Let's look at some of the key capabilities. I'm going to turn things over here to David, who is going to take you through this in more detail.
Thanks, Alex. Hello, my name is David Griggs. I'm a senior product manager here at AWS Elemental. We've got a lot to get through. It shouldn't take more than 3 hours, so get comfortable. So when you're building a service that deals with live video transport, it needs to have some qualities, some tenets to it that give customers the confidence that this is a service that's suitable for broadcast applications. And so we're going to quickly go through 4 key areas that we think are essential to any service in this space. So number one, of course, is reliability. We recognize, IP, UDP IP particularly, isn't inherently reliable. And so we need to introduce a quality of service layer that sits on top of UDP, sits on top of IP, that brings the service up to that level of quality that we need for these kind of broadcast, these highly available applications. And so for us, that really boils down to protocol support, protocols that sit on top of UDP that bring that quality of service layer. So some obvious choices are things like forward error correction, which of course our service will support, but we are very excited to announce that our service will also natively support ZigZee protocol at launch, which was yesterday, by the way, in case you didn't know. So we think ZigZee is a very interesting protocol. It's a win-win for us. It's a highly available, very well-established protocol, a lot of support in existing appliances, existing devices, existing software, and it works. So that for us is a key part of any service. We're also, this comes up a lot, and I want to cover it off very early in the presentation. We're very agnostic about the type of network we work with. Now, of course, point-to-point, flow-to-flow, we'll talk a little bit about what that means later, is within the AWS network. But we're also very agnostic about what the first and last mile look like. So particularly for the contribution use case, and certainly for some of the distribution use cases, we recognize that the type of network you deal with isn't always guaranteed. Now, if you're an events producer, for example, and you're traveling around the country or the world and going to different venues, you can't always make representations or assumptions about the quality of the infrastructure from the venue to AWS. And so we want our service to be able to give you the flexibility to work with those more challenging contribution first and last mile networks, including, of course, the public internet. I call out mezzanine quality here because we talk a lot about live video and mezzanine quality, and the term itself is quite broad. And so I wanted to just kind of set the parameters of what we think mezzanine, when we say mezzanine quality, what are we actually talking about? So for us, the sweet spot is that 8 to 80 megabits a second. That's where we've been doing all of our testing. But that's a broad range that covers right through your HD workflows, through to your UHD, HDR workflows. So this is a broadcast quality mezzanine live video service. Security is also incredibly important, and we recognize that. And so our service, MediaConnect, will support AES industry standard encryption end-to-end. That's right from your contribution encoder through to your receiver, end-to-end encryption with full support for 256-bit key depth. So when we talk about agility, we're really talking about all of that good AWS stuff. We're talking about the quick-to-deploy, pay-as-you-go model. We want this to be, in many ways, the contrast of an experience you might have with a satellite provider where you're negotiating a contract over several weeks, sometimes months. You're making a long-term commitment. And you also have utilization requirements. You have to use this capability or you're losing it. And so we want MediaConnect to be the opposite of all those things. Pay as you go, quick to deploy, build an international distribution network in a few clicks and a few minutes, not weeks and months. And of course, no commitments, pay as you go pricing. So transparency, that's important. We're talking about IP, delivery of video, and we need to know how successful that endeavor is. And so MediaConnect comes with a host of metrics that we will publish to CloudWatch, so it's fully supporting the dashboards, fully supporting your events or alarms-based workflows. And it's not just network-based metrics. So obviously we do report things like packet loss, recovered packets, ARQ, FEC, FEC-based metrics, but also basic TR 101-290. So transport stream level metrics are also recorded and published to CloudWatch so that you've got confidence at both the network and transport stream level and the transparency of your workflows. So those are really the 4 key areas that we think are essential for any service that is going to offer our customers live video transport. So let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into some of these use cases that Alex mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. We'll start with contribution, because I think and I should point out actually that whilst we talk about these use cases separately, they're really not. I think every use case has a mixture of contribution and distribution. So don't think of them as silos or individual features or ways to use a service. They're really designed to be used together to meet different workflows. And MediaConnect's really designed that way to give you that flexibility. But this is a very simple, what I would call a classic live OTT pipeline. Those of you who are familiar with AWS Elemental, you'll recognize some of our other key products up there, including our transcoder, Media Live, and our packager, Media Package, and of course, CloudFront and our client. But in the front of all of that, we now have MediaConnect. And so what MediaConnect is doing is bringing that reliability, bringing that security and that robustness to your contribution workflows and getting that content from, in this case, a live source through a contribution encoder to the cloud-based transcoder that's doing your ABR encode and ultimately your full OTT workflow. So this is a very simple use case, but I still think MediaConnect is bringing an immense amount of rigidity, or should I say robustness, to this contribution pipeline. So slightly more complicated, because this comes up a lot. So what about redundancy? What does MediaConnect do for redundancy? And the answer is that we don't enforce a redundancy model on our customers at all. It's entirely up to you to set up a redundancy model based on your own tolerance for risk and budget. So in this case, we've taken a fairly, I would say, quite a strong redundancy model. We have 2 individual on-premises encoders feeding 2 MediaConnect flows, which are AZ-aligned with each of the input endpoints of a Media Live input. This is quite a resilient model that would give you that kind of redundancy that you'd want for a premium channel. So again, very flexible, designed to work with your own tolerance for risk and redundancy requirements. So looking at distribution, I love this diagram the most. This is my favorite slide in many ways, because if you think about what this really represents, this is a distribution between, let's say, New York and London, and it's a few things. It's a couple of MediaConnect flows, and you've set this up in the best part of a minute. And you've got a high-quality, reliable, secure transport stream being delivered from one region to the other in a few clicks. And that's quite a powerful concept when you think about what you need to do today to make that same thing happen with existing technologies. So this really talks to the kind of agility and the flexibility that we build into all of our services, but particularly in this case with MediaConnect. So I'd like to show this slide primarily because what we've focused on so far is a very linear workflow where it's one in, one out. But MediaConnect is designed to work in many ways like, this is where the broadcast engineer in me comes out, but an old-fashioned distribution amplifier. It's really a cloud-based DA. It's a one-in, many-out construct. So it takes in a UDP stream or an IP stream, can create multiple versions of that, and then unicast that to multiple destinations. So we have this inherent flexibility capability, replication flexibility built into the product. So in this case, it's a simple example, but we are taking in a contribution feed into region 1, we're sending it to another flow in region 2, and in there we're actually sending it to 2 different locations. We've got our OTT pipeline going through Media Live, but we're also sending a copy of that stream to an on-premises location. Again, all the time using encryption, security, all the time using highly available protocols like ZigZag and RTP and FEC. So before we get into the sort of technical side of things and look at some of the demos I wanted to take you through, it's worth just spending a bit of time on entitlements. This is an abstraction that we've built into the product that's specifically designed to deal with content sharing. So a lot of the things that we've done or I've talked about so far have been very kind of deliberate, very active. I've decided I'm sending content to this IP address, or I'm sending content to this Media Live instance. What entitlements are designed to do is to deal with when you have the need to share content with a partner, for example. And so entitlements are really about content sharing with third parties or internally. And it works like this. It's an originator-subscriber model. And so an entitlement you create against an existing flow. Now remember, a flow is a one-in construct, so it represents something. Could be a channel, could be an event, but it's something. And so you create an entitlement against that flow that says this AWS account holder has the right to subscribe to my content. And so it looks a little bit like this. Here we are, we call it the originator's account. It could be a content owner, but it's someone who has the rights to distribute that content. They create the entitlement against their MediaConnect flow, and then at a later stage, completely decoupled from the granting of the entitlement, the subscriber comes in, goes into their own account, creates their own flow in the same region as the originator's flow, and takes advantage of that entitlement. They'll actually see it, and we'll show you a little demo of that in a bit here, but you actually see the entitlement in the list. You select it, and at that point, we connect the dots between the 2 flows, and content starts to flow between the 2. So it's a really, I think, very powerful concept. It's simple in nature, but really gives you a lot of flexibility when it comes to content sharing with third parties and partners. A couple of things I really like to point out about this, the things I think are really great about this. One, there's that whole decoupling of that subscriber-originator relationship. You set up the entitlement, you're done. You don't need to worry about IP addresses and ports and encryption. You're simply granting that entitlement. So then at a later stage, it's a completely decoupled thing. The other subscriber will come in and then take advantage of that entitlement. The second thing I think is really great is that it draws a very firm line around what is your infrastructure as the originator and what belongs to the subscriber and what are they responsible for and maintaining. So let's take a little bit now of a deeper dive into, this is a 300 session after all, into sort of the anatomy of the service, and talk a little bit about the architecture and how it all sort of comes together. So we'll start with this reference diagram because I'm going to come back to this quite a bit, and some of the demos that I'm going to show you kind of illustrate what we're trying to show in this reference architecture here. So this is a slide that we had a very similar version of earlier in the deck. It's a simple contribution through to an OTT pipeline, and then a distribution to an on-premises location. So there's only one thing you need to really understand about MediaConnect. It's a wonderfully simple service in that respect, and that is the concept of a flow. And a flow starts with an availability zone, and therefore a region, and has some properties. You give it a name, a description, we'll give it a resource ID, and an IP address. And then you'll start to tell the flow, okay, where is my source? Where is the content that I'm going to be transporting with this flow? And so you create this source record against the flow. Source has a name, it also has an on, but most importantly, it has a protocol and it has a port that it's listening on. And we also have whitelisting there so that you can securely constrain which devices upstream are actually able to send content to this flow. So there's security at that level as well as the encryption side of things. And there are some other properties, but I've just simplified this a little bit for the sake of this presentation. So now we've got a flow. It lives in a region. It lives in an AZ within that region. And so if you're thinking about a contribution workflow, you'd probably pick a region that's close to the contribution encoder. If it's a distribution workflow, you're going to probably pick a place where you want the content to end up. We then start adding outputs. So outputs, of course, as we said a minute ago, are multiples, right? There are many outputs for each flow. So in this case, I've added 4 outputs, each with their own name, so it's an identifier for me, so I know where the content's going. But also, importantly, protocol and IP address. So IP address should be obvious, is the destination that we want to send this content to. But the protocol allows us to also change the protocol that we're using for this distribution or this output on the fly. So a good example is if we've got a device, let's say it's a cloud-based playout solution that isn't able to support ZigZag protocol, for example, you can at least get the content all the way to a flow that's in the same AZ using ZigZag protocol, and then just over that last intra-AZ hop, use RTP or RTP with forward error correction. So there's a nice way of being able to essentially transmux these outputs to do different kinds of, to different protocols at the IP level on a flow-by-flow and an output-by-output basis. So in terms of managing all of this stuff, it's very simple. Like all AWS services, it has a console, and we'll show you that in a second. It also has full command line access, and of course the expected SDKs for the API, et cetera. And I call this out on this slide because I think it's important because it might get lost in the demo. The changes that you make to a flow, whether that's in the console or through the API, they're instant. There's no configuration that you need to sort of bounce the flow or restart the flow to have it take effect. The changes you make are instant, so you can add outputs, you can remove outputs on the fly without interrupting the rest of your workflow. So a couple of really simple CLI commands. So the service is called MediaConnect, and so the command is AWS space MediaConnect. And in this case, we're using a create flow and a very simple hello world example. And I'm actually going to do a demonstration here in a bit that will show an example of this. In this case, using the SDK, this is pseudocode, so don't judge me on this. But this is creating an output object in Python in this case and passing it through to a add outputs command using the SDK. So again, all of the things that you come to expect with AWS services, SDKs, APIs, all available with MediaConnect. And then lastly, adding a new output to an existing flow. So at this point, we'll get into a demo. I have to press this button here. There we go. So I'm going to start by doing a little demonstration of the entitlements workflow that we talked about briefly. So here I've got a flow that's set up, and as you can see, it's currently feeding a Media Live instance through 2 outputs, and that's pushing to a Media Package instance running here. And this is generating that OTT pipeline. But what I want to do now is I want to share my content, this content that's currently being ingested by this flow with my partner, Jesse TV. And so what I do is I go over to the entitlement screen, and I type in here, I grant the entitlement, so I'm going to give it a name. In this case, it's going to be Jesse TV. The account number, and I'm going to give it a description. That's my reference. Basically saying I'm going to send this to Jesse TV. I click the grant entitlement. In a few seconds, we'll see that entitlement will be created, and it'll get an on. And that on, you can then share out of band in email with that subscriber to say, here's your entitlement. This is what you need to take advantage of this subscription. However, they don't actually need that, because when they go to their own account, which I conveniently have prepared here, and they create a flow, and I'm in a different account here. I'm actually in the account that we set up the entitlement for. And I'm going to say this is from David. And I'm going to, in this case, let MediaConnect choose my AZ for me. And here I'm going to make a fundamental choice. I'm going to make the choice that this is going to be an entitled flow. In other words, this is going to be a flow that's based on an entitlement. And I pop down here, and now you see the only thing I have to enter is that on, which conveniently, Jesse TV has already been populated for me because of that entitlement that I granted a few minutes ago. I create the flow, and that will now do the necessary magic under the hood to create the flow. And then when I start that flow, we'll actually at that point, we'll see an output being added to my originator's account, the originating flow, which is essentially then actually doing the plumbing of sending the video from that one flow to the other. Let me show that in action here. If we go to the outputs here, we'll see in a second, once that flow starts, we'll see a new output added to the, sits down at the bottom there. And that's that entitled output. So if you think about that, it's quite powerful. As a content originator or owner, I haven't had to think about IP addresses. I haven't had to think about, is my subscribers' infrastructure ready for this entitlement? Are they ready to receive this content? I've just granted an entitlement, and at some later time, my subscriber has come in and said, okay, fantastic, I need to take advantage of that. I'm going to set up my own infrastructure. And of course, they're now free to come in here and add their own outputs and build their own stack on top of their own flow, which includes delivering it to an on-premises location or to a Media Live instance, for example. Okay. So now we'll do a little bit of, we're going to do a little bit of command line interface. So I thought I would start with showing you a very simple command that will create a brand new flow and 20 outputs at the same time. So in this case, I happen to know where I want to send this thing 20 times. And I've created a very simple JSON object here that describes that configuration. So as you can see, conveniently, they're all named output 1, 2, 3. And at the bottom here, I've described the source. And so this is a JSON file that I've saved to my drive. And I will just grab the, I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to grab the command from here. And I'm going to paste that into my command line interface here. So what this is saying is MediaConnect create flow, and then we're making use of that generic CLI input JSON construct, which allows you to specify a JSON file. And you can generate the skeletons for this JSON file using the create skeleton parameter as well for any of these commands. So hopefully, you can see that's returned me the JSON object, which has confirmed that flow with those 20 outputs has been created. You see it took a couple of seconds. If I now do a list flows, we can see now that we've actually got two flows, the one that was already running, the one that we did the entitlement on, and then a new flow, which is in standby currently, which is the one we just created. And if we go back to our flows in my account here, we can see we've got our new flow here, and there are the 10 outputs that we added as part of that JSON object. So really simple, easy to use command line interface, compatible with, as you would expect, with the JSON files, and super easy to manage. So at this point, I'm going to hand over the baton to our friends from Arqiva. You switch you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, David. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chris Barker, and I work for a company called Arqiva, and I head up the product development team. Hi, everyone. I'm Adrian Golding, and I'm head of software development at Arqiva.
Firstly, I'd like to thank David and Elemental for their continued support through the beta testing and listening to us continually through roadmap sessions and answering our calls. So who are Arqiva? We're a communications and infrastructure company serving the broadcast and telecommunications sector. We broadcast to satellites, around 40 satellites around the world, distributing to pretty much nearly every country around the world. And we first started business by broadcasting BBC's first television programs in 1936, so we have quite a heritage in broadcast.
Cool. And they might not realize it, but 98.5% of the population in the UK use an Arqiva service every day. That translates to about £1 billion a year in revenue, and we do that with about 2,000 employees.
We've got 1,300 customers, of which you can see 8 listed here, including very well-known names in the US as well, NBCU and Turner. So I just want to talk briefly through the Arqiva cloud journey, how we came to use AWS, some of the benefit for us, and kind of touch on David and Alex, what they said about things like infrastructure management and scaling and so on. And then we'll run through 3 use cases that are live with customers that we can see being real advantages for us being able to offer to our client base. So firstly, why did we adopt the cloud? Well, we have a lot of customers that are challenged by CapEx models, by 3-year contracts in which we have to depreciate a bunch of assets to deliver them services, especially when we're looking at event-based services and they have to commit to us. So we wanted to move away from that. And we identified a key portfolio that we could allow our customers the flexibility and agility to manage their services. The first is a playout service, which is primarily stitching audio, video, subtitles, metadata to create a linear TV channel. The next is a VOD and media asset management platform, which we use to process mezzanine assets to over 30 or 40 VOD platforms around the world. And the last is, and we'll focus on this particularly throughout the use cases, the last is a streaming platform which takes advantage of the rest of the Elemental portfolio, so the Media Live Transcode package and then CloudFront for CDN distribution.
Cool. So that's a very product-focused view of our cloud journey. But of course, you can't just go to the cloud with your products. You need a whole bunch of underlying stuff, which has been part of what we've been doing for the last few years. So we needed to change the culture a bit at Arqiva. We had a very traditional engineering culture. We needed to build out a DevOps team and function. And then we needed to create all those kind of bread and butter services which sit underneath your products. So, you know, your continuous integration pipelines, package repositories, VPN access, and all of that tooling, which takes you from the very quick and easy to deploy proof of concept that you can do in AWS to a fully managed service that you can reliably and confidently sell to your customers.
And of course, the other advantages for us in product development terms are the innovation and development practices we can use from that. So no longer do we have to buy a bunch of kit and take months for it to arrive, configure it, we spent the money. If it doesn't work, if the market's not there, it's a loss. So I really enjoy personally the product management aspect of being able to build services in minutes, days, test with the market, get out if it doesn't work. It's fantastic. So the first example service, a kind of a contribution to distribution service. As David said, it's never really that clear cut. But in this example, we have a customer in Africa for whom they have a live TV channel that wanted to be received by a French TV platform, which we wanted to distribute over satellite. Building fibers to many places in Africa is problematic. Dual and diverse is very difficult. And so MediaConnect really fitted in this hole very, very well. But we had other challenges around that model as well, including shipping infrastructure, which I'm sure Adrian will touch on.
Yeah, so our traditional way of solving this problem was to get a piece of hardware, configure it at base, and then ship it off to Africa to do the contribute the media. Now, the problem with that is this piece of hardware, it's a server, it's got an operating system, it's got software, and then it's got a service. Each of those layers needed to be configured perfectly without any mistakes, and then shipped off to Africa. In software development, you want your testing cycle to be really short. If your testing cycle involves shipping stuff to Africa, it's not short. And as I'm sure you're all aware, nothing ever works first time, so we kept getting caught in this quagmire of calling the customer, trying to coach them to either allow us connectivity to this box that we've shipped to them, or to actually configure the service on our behalf, which isn't really professional looking. And that's just the technical problems we had with that. Then you've got all the problems with kind of customs, excise, duty, tax, the practical stuff of who's going to carry the thing, who's actually going to do the delivery. So now with MediaConnect, we can do this with software. We can give the customer a piece of software, which if there's any mistakes, we can just roll an update. We can shorten our product delivery cycle from weeks and months to days and hours.
So it really is a fantastic innovation for our customers, and we're using it right now. A second example is a streaming service where we take a feed from air. Let's just say it's a European Championship football game, and we push that into the cloud to do the transcode and packaging for then distribution to a customer's CDN to whatever region they've got the rights for. When we started off out in the cloud, we did extensive tests to play out, actually delivering content in the opposite direction. And initially we did it over the internet. Didn't work, very bad quality of traffic out, not reliable at all for real-time video. We bought 2 direct connects, significantly improved the reliability, but we still found once or twice a month we might get 1 or 2 seconds, which it was just, we'd get a bit of latency or packet loss. And in real-time media, in live TV, you cannot even afford a few seconds. It's very punitive service credits and regimes. So we now use, or are able to use, and set up really quickly the MediaConnect services to give us the reliability of transport that we were missing.
Yeah, as Chris said, we were struggling with reliability of transport on the network. And the way that we were going to solve that was by using an infrastructure as a service solution. So we would be spinning up EC2 instances, installing Zixi, configuring them. And while we had the capability to do that, that's a lot of work. Our cloud strategy is to use software as a service as much as possible, because you really want to leverage everything that AWS can offer you. And if you're doing things that they can do for you, that's time that you're not spent on your products. And this is what MediaConnect allows us to do. We can do away with a whole bunch of EC2 instances. We can just stop worrying about it. Like getting video into the cloud has just gotten a whole lot easier.
And the last example is both a brief look at some pseudocode too, but an example where we take an esports event and we end up having to distribute it to kind of 80 affiliates around the world. And again, a very recent example and a very growing market for us, so this is an important opportunity.
Yeah, and what we're trying to show in this slide is how we can use orchestration tooling to turn the really great tools that Amazon have given us into a service that we run. So what we've got here is a API gateway fronting a Lambda function. And that Lambda function is using the Boto 3 libraries in Python to configure a bunch of AWS services. So we've got a MediaConnect in 1 VPC in our Dublin region. It configures MediaConnect in Virginia and Sydney, creates those flows, configures the AWS Elemental Media Live to do transcoding as close to the customer as possible. But then it can also do things like configure your CloudFront dashboards so that your operations staff have metrics. It can configure your contribution encoders back on premise. So what you're doing is taking all of these things, tying them together so that your service is automated. And I've just included a bit of pseudocode, an example curl command, which can set that up. And so what we've done is taken something that would have taken a couple of engineers in a couple of geographic locations months to configure, and turned it into something that one engineer sitting at home in his underpants can do in 10 minutes.
And the product side of that's sort of not something to dismiss lightly. So the repeatability, the use of code, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, is a bit of a step change for some of the broadcast industry, where it would have appeared to me at least a few years ago every engineer had its favorite vendor, and they had their own configurations for their particular vendor type. And so you were running hundreds of solutions. And in this way, we template services and we create a product and solution that's repeatable time and time again. So I guess to kind of wrap up and conclude, really, the MediaConnect for us will save us time and effort, both in a kind of dev stack and having to work on kind of an IaaS model to move to a SaaS model. It helps our customers deliver services more quickly. It protects traffic in a way that we really enjoy, and it saves us money. And yeah, we're really grateful for the opportunity to use the product.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Well done, thank you. Yeah, it's a great example of building applications on top of AWS Elemental Media Services and really adding some value through these kinds of solutions that companies like Arqiva are doing all the time. So we're running a bit ahead of schedule, but I'm going to finish up talking a little bit about how we price MediaConnect, and then I'm going to open it up to questions. So if you have got some questions, start thinking about them, because I am more than happy to take them. So I think the first thing I would say about pricing is that we absolutely recognize that we can have a very compelling operational model. And it can be the simplest and easiest service to use with all of this great functionality, but if it doesn't make sense at a commercial level, we've missed the point. And so we recognize that having this be commercially compelling is really essential to the product offering. So the pricing is extremely simple for MediaConnect. The pricing I've listed here is for Virginia. There are some differences, as with all of our services, depending on which region you're in. And I will say that all of the pricing is now available on the AWS website. You can go to the MediaConnect homepage, and you'll be able to see a full breakdown of the pricing. But in simple terms, there are two things that we meter. One is the cost per hour. It's a running cost. So you remember that I configured that flow, and then I started it. Once that flow is started, you pay a small cost per hour. In this case, in Virginia, it's 16 cents per hour for that running flow. After that, it's just AWS data transfer pricing. So it's a penny within a region, I think everywhere in the world. And in the case of Virginia, 2 cents a gigabyte for inter-region transfer. And then DTO, of course, as normal region pricing. So the way it works is if you have a flow in Virginia that's sending content to somewhere in London, you pay the Virginia pricing, not the destination. But at London, if you're then sending it out to a location on premises, you'd pay the London pricing or Frankfurt pricing or Dublin pricing, the region that you're in. We have launched in 8 regions. So we are in Virginia, US East Coast, US West 1 and 2. We are in Tokyo. We are in Singapore. We are in Sydney. We're in Frankfurt. And we're in Dublin. So we have a good amount of coverage. And of course, just like all of the AWS services and the AWS Elemental services, we will continue to roll out into the other regions as quickly as possible. So thank you for taking the time. I'm glad to give you all about 15 minutes back that you perhaps didn't have. But at this point, if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to ask them.
We'll stick around. Why don't we
Sure.
spread out, and that way we can answer multiple questions.
Yeah, let's do that, yeah.
Around here at the front of the room, and thank you all for coming. We'll take your questions up front.
That's good. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.